All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop Isolation Break Reading Series. Uh, I'm glad to be joined here. We're streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so I know some of you, if you're able to send any comments, we will be able to read them. And we should hopefully be joined by Vijay Seshadri, who he's our last reader in any event. So we're going to get going here. And happy National Poetry Month. This is a kind of a U.S. thing, is it? Is it also in the Philippines and Hong Kong and Australia? Do they celebrate such a thing?
We have our own variant. Yeah.
You have your own variant.
Yeah, same here.
Same.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose in the U.S., because April was the cruelest month, it had to become National Poetry Month, of course. So we have here 4 poets, but also 4 writers who work in multiple genres. And we are here to celebrate the publication of Meridian. And those of you who don't know, this is the Asia Pacific and Writers and Translators' first publication, co-published with Drunken Boat. And it's distributed by the Small Press Distribution in the U.S. And you can find it on the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators website. And I just want to say, and I'm not a very good barker, but I'm going to try my best today because I feel like the work in this collection is really spectacular and something very different than most anthologies that you will find in the U.S. And so over the course of this reading, I will be brazenly shilling for this book because we want to sell this book so that we can do further iterations. And for those of you who don't know, the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators is an organization anyone can join, and we host conferences around the region. This year, we took a break, of course, but we've had conferences in Hong Kong, the Philippines, New Delhi, Guangzhou, and many other places. And this is also a co-production of the New York Writers Workshop, which you can also find online. I'll just put in the chat some links. But the New York Writers Workshop for this month is partnered with the New York Public Library and is hosting 40 free online poetry writing workshops for the month of April. And all of those have been sold out. In fact, I've taught a couple and had over 50 people attend. So that's kind of pretty spectacular. So anyway, I'm very excited. We have here Jason Lee, Sophia Nas, Laudenmark de Camora, and Merlinda Bobis. And we will get started. I wanted to, Vijay, I was hoping would be with me because we were planning to kind of co-host this, but I thought I would just kick this off by reading just a little something. Vijay, who won the Pulitzer Prize, Guggenheim Fellow, wrote the introduction to this. And if I might just start our reading by sharing just the final paragraph of this introduction that he wrote, which gives you some sense, I think, of what the scope of what we're hoping to accomplish in this book. The eye-opening Meridian anthology, lovingly curated by Sally Breen, Ravi Shankar, and Tim Tomlinson, feels like an anthology that is decisively and unapologetically in the business of culture mapping. It is mapping out a territory and making a big claim. It is aspirational and it is descriptive. What it describes is a new world of the imagination, an Asia-Pacific region of the imagination that is, as America did in the late 19th and early 20th century, shrugged off its imitative uncertainties and deferences to assert its own idiom, form, standards of judgment, its own hermeneutics, and its own understanding of the significance of history and geography. What the Meridian Anthology aspires to is nothing less than making an area of the globe a unity by establishing it another republic of letters, a huge, various, enormously vibrant area bound together by English as the lingua franca, an area exploding with young energy where the need for self-knowledge that literature can supply is exigent and extreme. East of the Suez, yes, but also west of San Francisco. The ambition of these 3 anthologies is heady and amazing. The book they've made is new and fresh and thrilling, suffused with a sense of a beginning, but also with the sense of the perennial and the permanent. So we'll give you a little taste of this book, which has fiction writers, nonfiction writers, and poets, really from around the globe. The Asia Pacific Writers and Translators is kind of a concordance of writers from all over the place, and I think this book is a really wonderful introduction to some of the talented voices that we have. So welcome everyone. It's really great to have you all, and I believe that we're going to start off our reading today with Lodmark. So let me introduce him. And I will, if anyone is interested in the book, I'll put links into the chat. There may be some promotions during our event. Lodmark Comoro is coming from the Philippines. He's published poetry in 21 different countries around the world. He's a Best of the Net and Pushcart Prize nominated Filipino writer. He's earned honorable mention in the 2018 special Love issue of the Columbia Journal, probably the best issue to be in, I imagine. He has an MFA in creative writing and an MA in literary and cultural studies at the Ateneo de Manila University. He's also a faculty researcher at the University of Santo Tomas and assistant editor of Unitas, which is one of the oldest. And I hope we will, after our reading, we'll have a chance to have everyone in conversation. I hope Lodmark will talk a little bit about Unitas, because it's one of the oldest multidisciplinary journals in Asia, founded in 1922, so coming up on the centenary. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in many journals, including North Dakota Quarterly, The Common, the Seattle Review, Cordite, the Ilnot Review, and the Asian American Writers Workshop, The Margins, among other places. And he divides his time between Manila and Pampanga. So, Lodmark, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for kicking us off. And welcome, everyone. Nice to have you.
Hello, Ravi. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Can I start now?
Yes, it's all
right.
It's all yours, my friend.
All right. Okay. Yes. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Ravi. And first of all, before I start reading my work, from, of course, the esteemed collection, Meridian Anthology, I would like to thank first APWT and the New York Writers Workshop for having me here. And of course, it's really an honor to be sharing my work right in front of our dear audience from all corners of the world, especially to our host, to our guest, to our guest speaker, and of course to my fellow readers in this session. What I'm reading, of course, are the two pieces from the anthology. The first one came from my collection, which is going to be out by mid of this year, probably May or June. It's already my sophomore poetry collection, full-length collection. And then the other piece that I'm going to read right after this is the collection coming from my first book. So let me just discuss these poems later during our Q&A, for our Q&A. But of course, let me start with the first piece from the Meridian Anthology, which is titled Democracy Junior. Death Cab for COVID-19. So that's the first piece, sorry. Here we go. Ooga Booga, a cure song for the Majestus. I went out for a walk to hear the virus, spreading the anthemic royal sonic sutra of yada, yada, yada. Out there, old laps at empty grocery shelves dwindle, howling in pain. Mornings grew on flu that flew across Grouplove Park, son's recovery. Ooga Booga, Madonna of the eternal quarantine, don't sing for the electromagnetic subhuman abyss, not so far that we may know the way out, and find another cure for our existence. Bats remain bats. They glide, eat, and live. Chantez pour l'amour et l'égalité, ringtone of our indiscriminate skin. Call you DCFC or what? I held my hand up for your return, for silence that has been dousing hospital beds, curfew quick hours fumigating the hurt of home, and for the bouncy gigs crammed in this fix. I held out my hand, crying, please, please. Ooga booga, the scarred body shine without instance at 6 before 9. I thought Philistines were allergic to darkened rooms with moisturizers, as the rest of humanity saw social distancing move against the tide of the tourists. After a pleasant tea, life begins again. You'll be happier than me. Virally concerned, I freelance the wail of being okay, and oh, the warm water kills me. So that's the first piece. I think it's on page 95 of Meridian. And this piece is basically, of course, about the pandemic itself. And there is, of course, playfulness, ludic invitation even to the verbal construction of the poem itself. And of course, the idea of this poem is really all about the pandemic, rather contextualizing the perspective or the mind of a reader or a writer, rather than the writer contextualizing the pandemic itself, because the pandemic already is a context. Okay, it's already providing us this insight and, of course, information about what's going around the world. Okay, so that's the idea behind the first piece, which is titled Death Camp for COVID-19. And now let me proceed with the second piece, which is also part of the Meridian anthology. And this is, by the way, one of my favorite pieces from my first book. It's right here. I hope. Okay. This book is. I hope this book will echo also the piece that has been published in the Meridian anthology. Okay, so the second piece is titled Democracy Junior. Let me read it now. Democracy Junior. First, I was very proud I passed the test. The test was about how strong and firm I was with my fate, political or racial or hologrammatic. Second, the gift of democracy, so essentially fluid, ergo was time. I had to witness time's suture history, or the narrative of forgetting in peacetime. Third, how was the police, yes, the police, calculating the algorithm of hurt, when protesters were themselves curators of Lego-like ideas and wild algebra? Fourth, Kowloon was a place of blacker and blacker appeal to our fair mother. Fifth, she who stood this town by the palace walls read herself more than bodies melting in the rain, freezing in the sun. Sixth, the heroine who did this should become the anti-auteur. The second heroine in our mind would be the myth and metaphor of our freedom. Seventh, I didn't believe I would allow myself to listen close to my mind, how imagination gurgled so loud, repeating revolution like a Baccarat masterpiece. 8. From Manila to Hong Kong to my city Tetris, I have finally recognized that life was full of bricks. 9th, that if you try to fit in, you'll disappear. 10th, and the 10th was of course the trick. I wasn't double-crossed by anyone, by the crooked teeth of society. 11th, for this, I thank the Earth's magnetic field, how it deconstructed democracy in spheres of spectral marginalia. There you have it. That is Democracy Junior from the Meridian Anthology, and it's also coming from my first book, Tunnels, which was published last year. And the idea of this poem was, of course, about my visit in in another place, specifically Hong Kong, especially when I presented research papers. And of course, I have to really respect the signs as well as, of course, the moments or the events taking place in that foreign country. Uh, that's why I have to resort to uh, to treat the event itself, okay, because this piece is echoing the protests, okay, and also my experience of traveling Hong Kong when I was presenting my paper. And of course, rather than saying something about the event, okay, it's the event that is contextualizing my own perspective. So it's really about poetry as a contextualized and contextualizing subject. For these pieces, these are pieces that have contextualized my own perspective rather than me contextualizing the event themselves. Okay. So those are the pieces that I have contributed to Meridian Anthology. And thanks for listening.
All
Hello?
right. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Laudemar.
Okay.
And so
Thank you.
we'll have
Thank you.
a Q&A after this, and
Thank you.
hopefully we can talk about some of your conceptions behind your poetic process.
Good. Cool. Thanks.
All right. Excellent. So for those of you that are just joining us, I'm Ravi Shankar. This is IsoBreak, the 9th edition. We started this in March of last year, and we've been going pretty much every month. And we realized that the pandemic would be still going strong and really seriously in some parts of the world that we're very invested in. And so we hope that by bringing everyone together here online, that we can have at least a moment of respite. And of course, we're here to celebrate Meridian, which is the Asia Pacific Writers and Translator and Drunken Boat publication. It's an anthology that includes 37 writers, multiple genres, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And it is National Poetry Month, so we're joined by some poets, and it's my great pleasure to introduce next. Well, is Sophia has I think she stepped away for a second here. So maybe on the fly, we will transform and we might hear from Merlinda Bobis. And Merlinda, it is such a pleasure to have such a talented poet. Filipino-Australian writer Merlinda Bobis has published 4 novels, 6 poetry books, and a collection of short stories, as well as 10 dramatic works that have been performed. Her novel Locust Girl, a love song, received the Christina Stead Prize for Fiction in the New South Wales Premier Literary Awards and the Philippine National Book Award. Her poetry collection, Accidents of Composition, was highly commended for the ACT Book of the Year Award, and other awards include the Prix Italia and the Australian Writers Guild Award for her radio play Rita's Lullaby, and 2 other Philippine National Book Awards for her novel Fish Hair Woman and her collection of short stories, White Turtle. For her, writing is a homecoming, a return to her roots, a retrieval through memory, and a reckoning with loss with care and grace. She'll be launching her new book of short stories, The Kindness of Birds, next month, and I think we'll be lucky enough to hear a little excerpt from it. And she's currently coming to us from Australia, and this is the wonderful thing about IsoBreak. We have today readers from Australia, California, the Philippines. I'm here in New England. So it's wonderful to have everyone. And she's currently the honorary senior lecturer at the Australian National University. And so welcome, Merlinda. It's such a joy to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, everyone, for having me. And hello, everyone. Here is my poem in Meridian. Bignonia Rosa, on Calle Verde, Seville. Between pink and lilac, a little trumpet, mouth filigreed into 5 petals and throat purple veined, all the way to the heart, sprouting yellow filaments, each twin half notes or sweetheart notes conjoined. Its coy music, an almost public tryst. Listen, how it teases like a love ditty coded in secrets between pink and lilac. You can't parse tone from tone. You just hear it falling from a balcony, touching you, walking through an alley, and you look up, and oh, the little trumpets play on from a green canopy as you press your lover's hand and say, "Look, a floral choir," and he kisses you just above the ear where another bloom brushed past. As from a window, someone catches the kiss in time to say, "Mira," to her cat. But it does not look, just purrs back the quick kiss, the love ditty, the coy music, as only a cat would. It knows Alice as deeply as it knows secrets, even flowers, even love. So that is love in Seville, pre-COVID. And a few years later, these lovers reappear in a short story during COVID lockdown in Canberra, Australia. And this story is in my new book, The Kindness of Birds. I have here the cover, the image of the cover. The book is still at the printers, and we're launching it on May 14. And I can send you the Zoom link to the launch. Now, this is a collection of short stories that pay homage to kindness across cultures and species in the time of loss and grief, but it also interrogates kindness. And in this story, it is love in the time of COVID. I want to make it a mission in my life to contribute to your happiness. His was a profession of constancy. But now this bloody virus is testing it, sneakily infecting his offered happiness. No, just her air. She's grown more snappish, but he remains irrepressibly happy. It's heroic, she thinks, how some can shrug off the weight of darkness, but it sits on her shoulder even when she's in the light. She's having nightmares. All these deaths are doing her head in. She keeps hearing Emily Dickinson's "I felt a funeral" in my brain. Now he's squinting at the row of cedars outside their balcony. Hush, he gestures and points to the closest tree. She hears before she sees, a 3 to 4 note song, clear and high and rich with a slight slur between the final notes. Or did she just imagine that? A liquid trill that multiplies like the flitting from branch to leaves to branch, wet with a soft drizzle. She keeps squinting to make out the smallest of birds, olive brown or gray, with a yellow underside, a flock of them singing and feeding on what she cannot see. Wee Bill, she learned from the web, perhaps the smallest Australian bird, about 1/4 of an ounce, like the weight of a quick kiss, yet the music goes on and on. He smiles at her, smiling at the melodic spectacle. Ah, you're happy again. Mission accomplished again. The funeral in her brain has been nudged out by another line from good old Emily D. Hope is the thing with feathers. Oh, the things that the reclusive poet saw and heard, despite never having left her Amherst home, seasoned in self-isolation, but vision far-reaching. Now, well, COVID lockdown strains love, but they will try to be kinder as they endure this lockdown together. Kindness, dearest, both ways. That was the pact they made last night after watching TV's latest coronavirus update and how the afflicted body succumbs. From what seems like an ordinary cold and cough to flu-like symptoms, then you can't breathe. You need to be intubated, put on ventilator in ICU, pumped with oxygen, then the organs start shutting down. This was how her father died a year ago. followed last year by her aunt, her sister's husband, then her mother. All their lungs gave up at the final moment. Can't breathe, can't breathe. She felt that way last night, listening to the story of dying. And suddenly, all these deaths, faceless figures in an update, became her own. How kindred we are in mortality. No, how kind we could be when breath is still aplenty, with much to share around, because kindness cannot self-isolate. It can't be locked down for the select kin. Kindness is about making a kin, even of strangers. It moves both ways and always, like breath. But the question in this book is kindness kindness if it's only for our kind? And this story proposes an answer. All of them kin, as kindred as the lives and livelihoods now upended in Australia by loss after loss, including the stranger under a ventilator at the other side of the globe, now made present on our screens. We hope she finds that next breath, as we do. In our bodies, we remember we're in this together, in this in-out labor of the lungs. Inside us, a sadness grows, soft and strangely warm. We suddenly feel kind. But will we be a kinder world after this? How far does a warm feeling travel? In the streets, slums, camps, and many corners of the planet are lives that were upended way before this devastation. Wash your hands when there's no water. Go on lockdown when you're already locked down. Strict social distancing when the rest of the world have long socially distanced themselves from you. Your life is as invisible as your death and dying. No place in the queue, not even a figure in an update. Well, at the end of this love story, to dispel the funeral in her brain, the wife plays her ukulele and sings, "Today, while the blossoms still cling to the vine," and suddenly something magical happens outside their balcony in Canberra. All the trees singing, a chorus of different birds, such amplitude, an orchestration of a multitude. It's like being in the bush. She rushes out to the balcony, but it's hard to see anything in the dark. Arviz, she calls to her husband, "Come quickly, they're singing back." If you sing in the bush, the birds sing back. Her friend Jane, a sound artist and bird enthusiast, told her that once. Later she'll wonder if they were just mobbing a predator when they chorus together, as birds do. But what a communally tuneful casting out of danger. If only we could do the same with a virus. What? Who's listening? Who's singing back? Her husband is beside her now, perplexed. Shh, listen. Who is singing back? They can't see. What does it matter? To sing together is what matters. To sing different tunes, timbres, pitches, volumes in different registers, to harmonize or not, to sing not only with our kind, to sing even with the invisible, the unknown, but always to sing both ways, always. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much. And I'd like to leave this with you, this thought with you. Kindness does not self-isolate. It moves both ways and always, like breath. Thank you again.
Thank you, Merlinda. Beautiful. Kindness cannot be locked down. Indeed. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Those of you who are just joining us, I'm Ravi Shankar. This is IsoBreak, the 9th edition. This is a special celebration of National Poetry Month. But as you can hear, we have a multitude of different genres represented. Meridian, again, which is available at the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators website, as well as small press distribution. And, I'm normally not a barker, but I have to say, having worked on this anthology, and we got much more work than we could include, but these 37 writers, which come from 14 different countries, and as it says on the back, a rich conversation epitomizes a version of a meridian, a ghost map of connections ranging from Hong Kong to the Gold Coast, Tokyo to Abu Dhabi, Singapore to Kabul, pulsing with story and song. And Vijay Seshadri, who I just heard from, he's running behind but hopes to join us for his reading. So let's hope that he's stuck in traffic, which in New York can be quite a bear. But he wrote an introduction to this book, and it's for the cost of a lunch, you can have this anthology. And for this hour, I promised some special offers. And so if anyone buys a copy of Meridian during this special event this hour, we will throw in another copy of one of Drunken Boat's award-winning books, Collier Nogg's The Ground I Stand On, Union, or Lisa Russbar's The Hide and Seek Muse. So just to kind of sweeten the pot. Great to have you all. IsoBreak, again, is a co-production of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and the New York Writers Workshop, both of which you can find information about online. And it's my pleasure now from Hong Kong, and I hope you'll stay with us after this reading for a conversation, because it's always nice to hear from our friends from around the globe how they're doing and how things. And of course, Hong Kong, there's so much happening. And Jason is a poet and academic of mixed British and Chinese ancestry. His debut poetry collection, Beds in the East, was a finalist for the Hong Kong Poetry Prize and the Melita Humes Poetry Prize. His reviews and articles have been published widely, from the Oxford Review, Acumen, Envoy, Cha, the Hong Kong Review of Books, and in the following anthologies: The Best New British and Irish Poets, 2016, The Poet's Quest for Gold, and Dusty Hong Kong Poets in Conversation with Octavio Paz, the great Mexican poet. He's a literary editor for Postcolonial Text and currently chief curator for Poetry Out Loud, Hong Kong's longest-running poetry collective. He has a PhD from the University of Hong Kong and a BA from the University of Leeds, and he lectures at Hong Kong Baptist University. And he's a very fine poet who's represented in Meridian. And it's great to have you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ravi. Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. in Hong Kong, so I'll do my best to look all sprightly and full of energy. I'll start by reading a poem from the lovely Meridian anthology. It's called Tsunami, Tsunami, and it's on page 11 for those of you who have it. Tsunami, Tsunami. The water gods have risen to restore their old domain, and on they swill the waters round, pouring forth their engorged bellies in chaos unrestrained. And when the gong resounds to the murmuring waves, the birds will nod and fly away. And on the waters funnel and flow, deluging the plains below. And on, the breakers heave and roll and topple through the trees, sinking paddies and sliding homes, sundering yachts and passing sofas. And on, the household turns itself over, with its bath upon a rooftop and its stool on a TV. And with a final crunch of debris, the ebbing sludge now wanes, with the waters slumped and tamed. And the land is purged of its strife, as an excess of godly might brings back scenes of a floating life. And there is nothing more to say when everything is calm and the carp is flopping back to shore. And on, the cherry blossoms sally and sway, and life goes on in much the same way. So this is a poem very much in tribute to the indomitable spirit of the Japanese people in light of that very, very horrendous tsunami that hit the eastern coast of Japan. And what I want to do is I want to kind of follow that up with another poem, which for me combines some of the problems that we're facing ecologically with the ways in which we're contributing to this. In this case, about human corruption and the billionaire class. So this is a poem that will be published in the University of Leeds Stand magazine. And it's called, quite fittingly, The Rise of Slime. They come streaming out of nowhere, converging on sewers and beaches alike, powered by torrents of slime that ooze from factories, their chemically charged food. A layer of mucus reclines itself to bask in our provincial sunlight, its wheezy film of sludge, an algal bloom, reminiscent of prehistoric life. When all on the surface is fine, note how, beneath the azure depths, the polyp lies among idle coral beds, swallowing ammonia, bubbling its threats. The order readjusts itself again. At the bottom, the shark lies finless, helpless to steer its flank to action and fend off those who threaten its domain, while above, the bloated jellyfish gather to head a coup they did not devise, doubling their digits in gelatinous growth, their transparency a mere disguise. Dragging themselves far and wide, their calcified tentacles will grasp at what little fish remain in this pool, now that all the world's oceans are theirs to rule. So this is a poem that very much encapsulates many of the poems that I've been writing over the past decade, thinking about some of the global issues that we are facing. You'll note that I haven't really incorporated many poems directly relevant to Hong Kong for this reading, because I wanted to make it fit with the original poem in the anthology. But perhaps you can find traces of what's happening in Hong Kong and other places in the following final poem that I'll read for you. And it's called The Poet and the Dictator. And this says something about how, quite strangely, some of history's most totalitarian figures have also had a claim to writing poetry. So I hope you'll enjoy the symbiosis between the poet and the dictator. I have here a list of those who defied the great dictators of their time: Rizal, Locke, Mandelstam, and others who died for a just cause, yet left their words behind, forcing our pens to judder with their rage as the ink ran dry, their death warrants signed. I too inscribed my visions on a page and traded my country for an exile amongst strangers, breaking my bread with them, biding my time slowly and carefully, my name now changed to resemble the steel brought out from the hardships suffered by men. I snuck back under cover of darkness and led the people out on long marches, sung songs to a litany of bullets, and stood firm amongst them as their savior, offering my life up for their freedom. From prison, I wrote of my great struggle, and when they set me free, the newspapers echoed my words before they were shut down. Then I sat down with the secret police and spent time in the gulags and death camps. My ideas swung round like a hangman's noose until we came towards an agreement. A shot in the dark spelled revolution as the blood of the people ran riot down street corners, splashing onto street walls. But then peace came, and it was all worth it. Now, those are my words that adorn these walls. Soon they will name the public squares for me, and erect bronze statues in my honor, never thinking to question my actions, saying, what a lovely, nice man am I. So that's the poem, The Poet and the Dictator. And I presume some of you, you history buffs, will get references to some of the 20th century dictators that are historically significant. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. And we'll hear more about the work that you're doing now. It sounds like you might have enough poems for a new book, possibly.
Several new books, but I want to see how they get on.
All right. So welcome those of you who are just joining us. I'm Ravi Shankar. This is IsoBreak, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop co-production. And I want to mention the New York Writers Workshop is just finishing up 40 workshops at the New York Public Library. There might be some space still if you look at the New York Public Library's website in some of these workshops. But they're free and open to everyone. I've taught in them, and they've been kind of amazing. And I was thinking, we were in the last workshop I taught, talking about different definitions of poetry, and Stéphane Mallarmé, the French symbolist poet, said it's a job of poetry to clean up our word-clogged reality by creating silences around things. And it's kind of what I feel when we have the moment to actually listen to poetry and poetry from around the world. New York Writers Workshop is actually running in next month a special lunch poetry based on Frank O'Hara's lunch poems. So if you want to join for lunch for 50 minutes, there'll be generative exercise. Different poets will be teaching different weeks of it. And it's a very small time commitment, and hopefully you will get 4 or 5 poems out of it. So check out the New York Writers Workshop as well. And we are, of course, celebrating Meridian. And I want to acknowledge Sally Breen and Tim Tomlinson, who are the other editors. I also was the editor of this collection. And, when you work so hard on something and it gets so handsomely realized, it's really very fulfilling. And so it's my hope, especially in the US, that this book finds a home and finds readers, because there's so much fine writing happening in many other places around the world. And I feel personally that I want to break out of the insular shell that we have here. So it's nice to celebrate National Poetry Month with you. And Meridian, we're on to our last reader. I'm hoping Vijay Seshadri, who wrote the introduction to Meridian, can join us. He's running late, and I got a text from him, so we'll see. But we're going to finish off with finally a very fine poet, Sophia Nas, who's been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize in creative nonfiction and poetry. So another multi-genre talent, and her work is featured in numerous literary journals, including Poetry International, Rotterdam, the Adirondack Review, Blazewalk, Scroll, the Daily O, Cafe Dionysus, and many others. And she's published poetry collections, Peripheries, Pointillism, and Date Palms. And Shanaz, and I have this, it's a wonderful biography of her mother published by Penguin India in 2019, and in fact has a new book that is forthcoming that Sophia was just telling us about backstage in the green room. And so we might hear some poems from that collection as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here for IsoBreak, and Sophia for being our final reader this evening.
Thank you, Ravi. And thank you so much to Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and the New York Writers Workshop. And I'm really thrilled to be part of Isolation Break episode 9. So I'm going to start with a poem from Meridian, and it's called The Lesson. Is something to be learned from loneliness, the curve of each day shot across the bough? Do neglected bouquets know that the heart is nothing like a rose. Both tropes so overused it bears repeating, like twin petals of the beat itself. 1-2, 1-2 to score, music of the four-chambered maze. Close those eyes, their bright windows, to peruse a rhizome, continuous, profuse, subterranean stem, the eye seeping seamlessly into them. Listen, there's a lovely violin to the east. Red neckline of the rising sun, and standing still, still standing, relics of the elders, bay laurel, oak, redwood, manzanita, frozen in a paused narrative, retreating as touch-me-nots into winter, permanent char, staining time's elastic. At 11, the mountains take off their cloud crowns. Lizards belie alliterations of nursery rhymes to do push-ups. Rise and fall, and then the lull. Something breaks and something bends. Where's the learning in all this? I leave the page open for you to guess. So that was from Meridian. And this next poem is actually, as Ravi said, from Open Zero, my new collection that's coming out from Yoda Press this year. And it's called Hands. I think in the pandemic, we've paid a lot of attention to our hands, but this is actually a pre-pandemic poem. Hands. If your hands could smell, you'd be an octopus. Every surface sent a million stories. The stealthy stickiness of slugs would seep, epics in the drama of the underbrush. Melting stalagmites show and tell in your digits, earth as memnosine. If your hands could smell, the suck of subway cars would stop you dead in your tracks to decode teeming conduits, lighting up nosegays on your fingers, newborn bouquets, archaic attar. Each night, etymology of odor would allure you, greedy as Prometheus, but unable to steal the summer of a firefly, the distant musk of a star. If your hands could smell, you'd speak in canine, each pole and passing bush whisper, each sniff you'd get the snitch of neighborhood carousing in high fidelity, until weary of invisible graffiti scroll of metropolis unfolding in endless olfactory braille, you'd head for the woods, hoping trees were not such talkers, or at least would shoot the breeze between sentences. How long did you walk? It's hard to tell, but when you fell, palms down, cupped hollow as a flute upon the ground, you understood how the void makes music possible. And history had it wrong. It was not earth who bore witness. It was your hands all along. So that was Hands. And then this is a poem that's very recent. It's called All the Water in the World. All the water in the world, about 13 billion eons old. Water of Tethys and new womb, breaking, turbid and limpid and frozen and gushing, Niagara and Erie and Indus and Atlantic, and speaking of oceans anonymous, snowflakes numinous, falling silently as hair grazing ground, sills secrets of the drowned, undoing time, abiding in the tides, march of middle passages, tsunamis of history whose rust still stains ink the color of dried blood. Draw blood that runs like water, cries like mother, cries for mother, a clot, a stop to the shot in the back, in the dark, in the bed. The madness of no return belongs to the desert. I've pinned my hopes on the young and old flood, the whole damn thing. Come, swell current, swift, ungodly hands to skies. Bring on the rain. So I don't know if I have time to read one more. Ravi?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, one last thing, which is because it's National Poetry Month, so this is an homage to poets. Profession. I could have been a chemist, but no alembic captures cry of a broken bulbul in a calligraphic gesture. No loom to weave, peeling, cartwheeling, remembrance, and happenstance to knit, synonym or tourniquet, daily hemorrhage of sun, set or rise from writ of east. Instead of mapping metaphor, I could have been a baker, but I'm a bird, hooked on the bite, to form as dough, the strange Eucharist from yeast of hands that grows and seasons longing, as breath on a mirror conjures the mist and blur of autumn, and a dove's key unlocks vaults of every morning. But what do I profess? I'll say only this: it's poetic origami, no cuts to the paper, and all the lines fold in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And thank you all for this latest iteration of IsoBreak number 9, in celebration of Meridian. Those of you that join us late, if anyone buys Meridian during this hour, you can get a free copy of another one of Drunken Boat's books, some of which are out of print and in quite demand. So it's a special just for this hour. And listening to Sophia, such great poetry, and I was thinking about anthologies, the etymology being kind of flower collecting, and Meridian really is, I think, a great example of these voices that never really would have a home together otherwise. And I'm so excited for Open Zero, Sophia.
Thank you.
Tell us about when it's coming out and who is coming out with again.
So it's coming out from Yoda Press, which is a wonderful indie press, a feminist press from India, run by Arpita Das. And it's coming out sometime in the fall. So I will most definitely be sharing links for the launch. And I've also done the artwork for it. The artwork for it was done the burned trees from my home, I pounded that into ink. I've studied Japanese calligraphy, and I pounded it into ink, and with that ink, I've drawn the cover art.
Wow.
So
Lovely.
thank
And
you.
I see actually, and I don't know if you can follow along, but people are writing comments, and there are some a lot of likes and hearts, and even a couple of tears because people were so moved. And there is a question here from Merlinda from Eve. Merlinda, with respect to your reading, Eve asks, "Is kindness kindness if it's only for our own kind?"
Yes. Yes. That's actually a question that I raise in the book again and again, because the book, as I said, is a homage to kindness across cultures and across species. So I find that when we talk about kindness, when we have this kindly feeling, a lot of times it is reserved for those of our kind. How do we cross over? We could actually, when we watch television, for instance, especially in these times of COVID, we suddenly feel kind when we see someone suffering. But it stops there. I'm questioning how we are, as in Australia especially, we have been invoking the word kindness. Kindness is always there. We're in this together. And I always ask the question, who is we? Who are accommodated in your kind world? And I think with all, and we see it even in the way the vaccine is being sent into places. We've heard of vaccine nationalism, but also in the way we even just in our own neighborhoods, how we relate to each other. So this is an ongoing question for me, living in a multicultural country like Australia. So that, I guess, that's something, and I'm sure that's something that also you ask yourselves where you are, everyone else.
Does anyone else want to respond to that? I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, right? I mean, what are the boundaries of kindness, and or should we be totally permeable?
Well, we're just coming out of this thankfully with the defeat of Trump, and we are finally coming out of the whole this xenophobic narrative, constantly hammered at the top. We had 4 years of it, but even now, it is definitely there. There's so many people still with the vaccine that says, why should I take the vaccine? I'm young and healthy. I'm not getting sick. So people are still so self-centered, and I think that comes from the top. And I think that it will take some time before this toxicity dissipates in every way. The selfishness is another virus. I think it's worse. It's a virus that is, it's exacerbated by this other virus. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah. I mean, in the U.S., I mean, simultaneously to the virus, which I think underscores our shared humanity, because all of us are susceptible. There's also been a kind of racial reckoning that is long overdue.
Yes.
That's been happening, and I feel like the two. I mean, maybe there is a lesson to be learned in some ways, right? I mean, because we are, of course, all human. I know Australia has similar kinds of problems, especially with policing, isn't it right, Merlinda?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
The Black Lives Matter protests because of the deaths in custody of Indigenous peoples, overrepresented in our prison system. Yeah. But also, I like what you said, Sophia, about this that it's also a virus, the toxicity of the side. But I'm actually, it's a challenge. We talk about the virus is infective. So what I'm putting on the table is KV20 or 2021, kindness virus. Kindness is infective, actually. If we have to keep talking about it. And I really believe, as a writer, as a poet, or whatever is your genre, we can talk about the devastations. We can talk about grief and loss. But I think we should never forget the other side, the back and the palm of the hand. Otherwise, if we stop talking about the positives, the kindness, the capacity for that, we forget that we have that capacity. So I'm putting it on the table. KV20, kindness virus 20 or 2021.
I like it. The KB 2021. Okay, I can get behind that. Kindness and compassion. I would like to bring Laudenmark and Jason into this, and particularly from the angle, I'm interested in Laudenmark's poetic process, but also the two of you are also have a kind of critical capacity in your role as editors, both of Unitas and the Post-Colonial Journal, right? And so I'm just curious, how does theory and critical thought kind of inform your poetics, Laudenmark? Because I felt that with democracy now particularly, that there seems to be a deep connection there.
Yeah, because of the way theory shapes the poetic process, or even the poetry itself, it's really helpful for editors, even writers, to know about theory, to know or to be familiarized with the critical procedure or the method on how to shape the creative process or even poetry itself. Because if you do not know how to contextualize a particular event, or let's say an image or a moment, some reflections or key concepts will not be able to be integrated in your own technique. So it's good that you have to be guided by a critical thinking, or let's say it could also be a philosophy of your own choice. It could also be a language that you are trying to master or deconstruct or play with. So it's a kind of language wherein lines in Democracy Junior use. So this kind of playfulness is their own language, even though each line in the poem is not related. Okay, so lines are not related to each other. Basically, they are not related. Like, what is the connection of Tetris, let's say, to a Baccarat masterpiece? So these images or image thought are not really connected. They are basically unrelated to each other. But because of the playfulness, because of theory, they can speak that kind of language. For example, okay, in Democracy Junior, each line has a drawn image, and each image doesn't echo or talk about the other image that is appearing in the next line. So how are you going to solve that kind of a puzzle? So how are you going to connect each image or line so that they will be connected, so that they are so that they can be related in some way or in some sense to each other. So because of language, because of the playfulness, they are being united. They speak a common language because of playfulness and because of theory. I'm thinking here of like a process, a philosophical process, like the Denk build. I forgot the term. Denk build by Benjamin. I think I heard this one before, or I read this one in some philosophy books. Denk build, wherein there is an image thought that should manifest in a particular line, even though some lines are not connected to each other. At least there is an image that will bind those lines. And because of playfulness and because of the language theory, they can perhaps talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Dr. Stein, actually, when you're talking tender buttons, and this idea of taking the weight and volume of words and bringing them together. It makes sense, right? I want to bring Jason into this, and I think perhaps you work in a very different way, I imagine, but as an editor of post-colonial text, I imagine that you also use critical discourse in some respect with in terms of your own poetics.
Yeah, certainly, Ravi. Certainly, when I grew up, I lived the post-colonial diasporic experience, and that's not something that leaves you. And I think when you kind of remove yourself from the equation, you can use theory as a very useful contextual backdrop, both for writing but also for instructing others in your poetry. And I guess that's very useful because poetry is not the dominant medium of the English language. I mean, that's given way to film and even video games, but it can be useful, particularly as a kind of instructional manual. But also because I'm an educator as well as a creative writer, I do think that you can't over theorize things. And theory, it's got a kind of mixed reception because it can limit as well as elucidate. So, as someone who teaches multiple theories in a course like literary theory, I always say to my students, there is no one correct way of thinking. And what I hope to kind of do with my aesthetic, my poetry writing, is to kind of open worlds, not to give any kind of prescriptive reading. And I think we're all on that page, but certainly there is a potential that some people get so caught up on the theory that they impose it upon any reading. And that's something that I think can sometimes diminish what the poetry art form can do.
That's well said. Yeah, I agree. And I'm just reading the comments here. Someone to Merlinda's thing says, I agree, or to Sophia's, selfishness is a raging virus here in the U.S., as well as the insidious anti-Asian epidemic. All right. So there, I think there is people are on board for the kindness movement, for sure. Well, and let me go back to Jason here for a second, because I know that you're in Hong Kong. Can you just give us a little update? Because those of us in the U.S., we follow along. We've seen what's happened to journalists now, and anyone who's been had raised any kind of voice at all. How are things there?
There's official discourse, and then there's the everyday lived experience of being in Hong Kong. So I can only really speak for myself. I don't want to speak for the wider collective of Hong Kong, however you might construe that. Freedom of expression is still technically guaranteed under the one country, two systems basic law. And what we as artists and writers want to do is we want to make sure that that freedom is upheld. That doesn't necessarily mean being confrontational or being subversive. It's a basic legal right that has been established. But we are aware, of course, that with all of the politics comes impositions. And I think there are a whole multitude of different responses to this. I've always tried to kind of find ways of reconciliation, ways of healing, because of all the troubles that Hong Kongers have gone through. More than just politics, there's economics involved. There's also COVID, which has really had an impact. And there's also this idea that, there is this idea of fear. And if you can find your own freedom from fear, then in some small way you have one already. And a lot of my recent poetry about Hong Kong is not directly political. It's about how we try to create for ourselves within our own mental space a sense of self-liberation, a sense of being free. And I think that is important and something that I try to pass down onto the younger generation who have to bear the costs of whatever is happening. I hope there will be opportunities in future. I imagine there will be. But at the moment, the current mood is quite grim. And I think poetry, in the past, it can be used to rouse. It can be used to create positive action. But I think equally, it can create, as Melinda says, aspects of kindness. The kindness of Hong Kong people to one another. The kindness of strangers that we see on the streets. So that's the idea that I try to retain in this place that we call Hong Kong.
And that's wonderful. Sorry.
Yeah, Merlinda, let me ask you.
And that's wonderful, Jason, that you continue to, even if you say you're not speaking for the collective, but you are with them, and then you are not speaking for them, but you are with them. And I think and even in writing, when we write a line, it is about words being with each other, making kin of each other, down to the punctuations. But I just like to speak to Laudenmark's, point about theory. And the creative practice. I've done. I taught for 21 years at University of Wollongong, and I've done scholarly work as well. But I actually wrote about the concept of creative critical empathy, where in your practice, where you have the critical mind and even theory and the creative practice working hand in hand. But one of the things that I found, as I grow older, is this concept when I discovered, and it humbles me, this idea of, I believe, grassroots theorizing. So not the theory, because I am, I love theory. I've worked on that as a scholar, as a teacher at university. But my problem sometimes with theory is that it's very Western. It's the West imposed on this, and how to read my work, theorize my work, and I disappear. So what I'm saying, when I talk about grassroots theorizing, it is actually storytelling, because I believe indigenous peoples theorize from the ground up, as the philosophy that they put out there, which is very humbling and actually blows your mind away. Sometimes I'd rather run with them than the theory of, that we read in books, because I think that is. There is always a danger of privileging. All of us who have worked with the printed word, and also especially the university context, there is a danger that we could privilege all those theories that are handed down to us by Western theory, and then we suddenly forget that where we come from, there has always been a lot of philosophy, a lot of theorizing from our elders. I just want to put that on the table.
That's great. Thank you, Merlinda. Yeah, I mean, I always think of theory as a kind of a lens, and different lenses that can be replaced that allow you to kind of look at the work, but the work itself is sui generis, right? It's like all of creation. It comes from another place, and it can't be reduced to any one particular interpretation. Laudenmark, did you want to respond to Merlinda there?
I agree with her. I agree with her. Nothing more to add.
Yeah.
I just want to say, yes. So I've been for the past since 2013. I've been enrolled in continually in this wonderful thing called ModPo, which is run out of University of Pennsylvania by Al Filreis and Kelly Ryder's house. So they have a really amazing crowdsourced approach to close reading of poems. So it goes back to, not imposing one reading or one lens onto any particular poem. This is really interesting because they have videos on the poems in which Al Filreis and his teaching assistants, they discuss it from their points of view, and then they throw it out to all the students. And the enrollment in this group is like, I think it's exceeded 50,000 in the pandemic. It's the most popular poetry course in the world, and so they throw it out to this crowdsourcing, and the worldwide alumni have just the most amazing ideas, So as many viewpoints there are, as many, it's all over the globe. So this has really been an eye-opening process for me in terms of, it's influenced my work also. This complete decentralization of viewpoints, and I think that also occurs in the anthology. I feel that it's a wonderful multiplicity of viewpoints, and I think this is what we need more of. Post-colonial literature. Definitely, we need more and more of this. As much as we can widen the kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
It's democratizing poetry.
Indeed.
It's democratizing literature, storytelling, which we all have in our respective cultures.
Absolutely.
It's innate to us as human beings, I think, right? I mean, Yes, I really like what you said, Sophia. I mean, there's a way in which uh, we forget the roots of where some of these stories come from, and uh, I think that the relationship between theory and practice needs to be made more organic, perhaps. Does anyone have a thought about this?
I just wanted to say that one more thought, which was about how it's related to politics. You can actually relate, fascism or authoritarianism is exactly the opposite of the multiplicity of stories, because every time you have a nation state, you want to impose a single narrative, a single origin, so that's
Not just that, but you want to exterminate the older
exactly.
versions of stories, right?
Exactly.
Eradicate them. And, I mean, I think what you say about the decentralization is such an important thing in the US. And I don't know if it's the same abroad, but especially in school, people are often intimidated by poetry. And I remember I was at a conference that invited Robert Pinsky, who was a former poet laureate of the US, too. And he had this project called the Favorite Poem Project, where he had everyday Americans recite their favorite poem, and he made a DVD of it. And so he was talking about it, and during his Q&A, someone asked him, a teacher said, my question is, how do we make our students start loving poetry? And he said, yeah, that's totally the wrong question. The right question is, when did we make them stop? Because as young people, there's a certain, you revel in the sense of enjoy and pleasure of language. And somewhere along the way, there's this sense that a poem makes you feel kind of intimidates you, or the teacher is the only one who has the right interpretive path and the key to the meaning. And of course, any artistic experience, that's the beauty of it, is open to many subjective interpretations. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I mean, anyone here have a story about how literature is taught in your respective countries? Because in the U.S. certainly, and especially with poetry, I found, because I've worked with students from elementary school to graduate students, and probably right around high school is where there is a kind of disconnect that happens. And I don't know why, because poetry is such a natural part of our human experience.
But, well, I think with having taught for 31 years, I find that, when there's the resistance against poetry, but if you make the students take them through the journey that the poem is about them, it's not just about this poet writing somewhere and thinking these thoughts from an ivory tower, that it's about them. It's a lived life. And I'd like to think as writers, whatever is your genre, we really come from a tradition of poets. We come from a tradition of storytellers, and that's very humbling. We are just a cog in the wheel at the moment. And so in effect, Sophia, poetry is already decentralized. It's already democratized if we actually go back, because we have been doing it in the Philippines, for instance, the oral tradition of poetry, how our elders sang, and even in India,
Yes,
how our elders sang. But you see, the question now in contemporary times is, who gets heard? Who gets recognized as the poet? Who is officially the story that is worth teaching, passing on? And I feel, as a teacher, as a writer, it is my responsibility to keep passing on and acknowledging that it's not just me, hey? I am just a cog in the wheel, and I'm passing on something that came from way, way back, which is also your story from way, way back.
Beautiful. Someone wanted a link to the group. I just posted it in there. Alpha Lyris and the Kelly Writers House conversation, which I took part in once, and I should come back to it. It's wonderful to have so many people from so many walks of life who are invested and who different poems can speak to. Great. Well, we are. I was hoping that VJ would make it, but it looks like he might not. But I will I'll read again the little blurb on the back that he wrote about this book. And everyone here has work in it. And there are, of course, 30 odd other writers from around the world. But as VJ says, what the Meridian Anthology aspires to is nothing less than making an area of the globe a unity by establishing it another republic of letters, a huge, various, enormously vibrant area bound together by English as the lingua franca, an area exploding with young energy where the need for self-knowledge that literature can supply is exigent and extreme. The book they've made is new and fresh and thrilling, suffused with the sense of a beginning, but also with the sense of the perennial and the permanent. And so it really is a very fine, and I have to also, I should acknowledge Aaron Chapman, who's the designer, who did a wonderful job with the layout and the cover of this collection. And I encourage you to get it. And as has become tradition in the IsoBreak reading series, we typically end by having everyone give us a little fortune cookie at the end of this delicious meal. So what would you like to leave everyone on? Any bit of wisdom or something that you're reading or thinking about, or a call to action that you want us to embark on? Laudenmark, you want to kick us off, or what would you like to leave us with?
I'd like to just repeat what Dr. Bobby has said, that poetry is really at the end of what you're doing. It's really about you. It's really about your journey. So after knowing all these insights, after mastering the language, after knowing other languages or whatever language, or even critical thinking, it's still about your journey. It's still about your experience. So do not be afraid to take risk, whether you're risking with language, whether you're risking with the form, whatever structure. It's still about you. It's like you revealing yourself to your own work, revealing yourself to your readers or to the world, because the work itself is really indeed you. So do not be afraid to take risk, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how people or readers will look at it. It's still you. So do not be afraid to take it out. Okay, reveal whatever it is that you want to reveal. So that's for me. And poetry is all about, once again, a contextualized and contextualizing subject. So it's really about taking risk. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Laudenmark.
Thanks for having me.
It reminds me of Samuel Beckett, right? Fail again, fail better. Right? That's the process of making art. Sophia, how about you?
Well, poetry's to me, it's an interesting. There's a kind of dichotomy in the process of poetry, because when you write it, it's a solitary act, but when you share it with people, that is when it kind of no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the reader in a way, because it changes. The making of meaning, it's between it's by the reader, so that's I think it's the magic of poetry. It's unlike any other form of writing, in my opinion, because it's not the directional map of the destination. It is about the journey, and it is about the making of meaning in the journey. And I think that's magical, and that's why it's always, always my first love, poetry. And that's what I want to leave everyone with, my love for poetry. And may it also be yours.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And thank you for your wonderful
Thank you for having me.
Jason.
I don't really want to make any prescriptive comments on poetry, because poetry is all. But In times of need, in times of desperation, poetry is that fountain, right? It's that thing that manages to energize us no matter what. So, my ending postscript will be this: love yourself, love each other, love your community, and don't be afraid to write from the nooks and crannies of your own individual trauma, because it's through that you connect with yourself and each other, and the community is so much enriched by each person feeling that they have a stakehold in the everyday lived experience. And this is something that nobody can stop this. There is no authority that can police your mind if you don't allow it to.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for sharing your work today. Merlinda?
Well, I will return to KV 2021. Kindness Virus 2021. Infect your poetry with it. And when I really believe that for a poem, kindness is about making interconnections with another. And in writing a poem, for a poem to come alive, you actually have to make kinships between words down to the last punctuation. And if you don't have that kinship, that connection, the poem doesn't happen. So I really think, that's what I would like to share with you. Just this, the idea of KV 2021, Kindness Virus 2021.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you all. This has been IsoBreak number 9. I will just read you because the New York Writers Workshop is doing this lunch poems. And so Frank O'Hara, who wrote, "Now I'm quietly waiting for the catastrophe and my personality to seem beautiful again and interesting and modern." And perhaps that will happen during the lunch poem session. So happy National Poetry Month. It's so great. We've got a lot of comments that this is a sustaining event from many corners of the globe to have everyone. We hope to be in Bangalore for the conference this year. Hopefully that can happen again next year. But in the meantime, this is a nice silver lining that we can all at least connect virtually. And hopefully everyone is staying safe. Again, I encourage you to get a copy of Meridian. Hopefully we can do another edition because we have such a wonderful membership from APWT and New York Writers Workshop. So, yes. Well, someone take a screenshot of this.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, everyone, for your wonderful works and thoughts. Very inspiring. Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe.
And spread the kindness virus, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
How do you stop?